What happens when the most powerful man in the city is confronted with the one thing money can't buy, the truth? One boy's words just cracked the armor Sterling Voss spent 25 years building, and the whole city watched it happen. Welcome to Mr. Nuel Stories. Please like this video, share and comment. The podium waited like an altar. Sterling approached it with the confidence of a man addressing his congregation. The crowd settled into expectant silence, reporters with pens poised, city officials wearing political smiles, protesters clutching their signs like shields. Behind them all, the Harper Heights Community Center loomed like a tombstone. Its brick walls had witnessed 40 years of birthday parties, wedding receptions, high school graduations, and community meetings. Soon, it would witness its own funeral. Sterling gripped the podium edges, his knuckles white against dark wood. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of accumulated wealth, "today marks the beginning of a new chapter for this community. The Harper Heights redevelopment project represents more than just construction, it represents transformation." His words were polished, rehearsed, designed to sound caring while saying nothing. "We're not just building apartments. We're building opportunities. We're not just creating retail space. We're creating jobs. We're not just modernizing infrastructure. We're modernizing hope." The reporters scribbled. The city officials nodded. The protesters' faces hardened. Sterling continued, painting pictures with words that had no connection to reality. "This project will bring $15 million in annual tax revenue to the city. It will create 500 construction jobs and 200 permanent positions. It will transform a struggling neighborhood into a destination." What he didn't mention, the 200 families who would be displaced. The small businesses that would be shuttered. The community center that would be demolished. The fact that none of the new housing would be affordable to current residents. "We understand that change can be difficult," Sterling said, his voice taking on a tone of manufactured sympathy. "That's why we're committed to helping existing residents transition to new opportunities." Translation: "We're giving you 30 days to disappear. We've partnered with relocation services to ensure everyone finds suitable housing." Translation: "Here's a list of apartments you can't afford in neighborhoods you don't know. And we're offering job training programs for those who want to be part of our new community." Translation: "Learn to serve the people who replaced you." Sterling smiled, believing his own performance. This was what he did best, turning displacement into opportunity, gentrification into generosity, profit into progress. The crowd was restless but controlled. The protesters held their signs higher, but they weren't disrupting. The reporters asked predictable questions. The city officials offered predictable support. Everything was going according to plan. That's when Micah slipped through the crowd. The boy moved like smoke, weaving between legs and camera tripods, sliding past security guards who didn't think a 12-year-old posed any threat. His notebook was tucked under his arm, his eyes focused on the stage. Sterling finished his prepared remarks and stepped back, allowing Mayor Richardson to take the podium. The mayor began his own speech about public-private partnerships and strategic development. That's when Micah's voice cut through the political noise like truth through lies. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was young but clear, carrying across the crowd with surprising strength. "Can I ask a question?" Every head turned. Cameras swiveled. The mayor paused mid-sentence. Sterling's eyes found Micah at the edge of the stage, looking up at him with those same knowing eyes. "This isn't the time, kid," Sterling said, his voice tight with control. But Micah didn't back down. If anything, he seemed to grow taller. "You said this project will help the city. But what about the people who already live here? Where are they supposed to go?" The question hit the crowd like electricity. Murmurs rippled through the reporters. The protesters leaned forward. The city officials shifted uncomfortably. Sterling forced his political smile back into place. We're providing comprehensive relocation assistance. Everyone will be taken care of. Micah shook his head. That's not what Mrs. Alvarez said. He pointed toward the elderly Latina woman in the crowd, the one holding the photograph. She's lived here for 30 years. She got a letter saying she has 30 days to leave, and no one's called her back about relocation assistance. She's 74 years old. She doesn't speak English very well. How is she supposed to find a new home in 30 days? The camera swung toward Mrs. Alvarez, who clutched her photograph tighter. It was a picture of her late husband in front of their apartment building, the building that would be demolished next month. Sterling felt his mask slipping. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Our team will. What about Mr. Johnson? Micah continued, his voice growing stronger. He owns the barbershop on the corner. Been cutting hair there for 20 years. Built his whole life around that shop. Your letter said he has to close, but you didn't offer him space in the new development. How is that taking care of everyone? More murmurs. More cameras turning toward the crowd, finding Mr. Johnson, a black man in his 50s wearing a barber's apron, his face a mixture of sadness and anger. Sterling's smile became strained. The new retail spaces will offer opportunities for. Opportunities for who? Micah's question stopped Sterling mid-sentence. The rent for your new retail spaces starts at $5,000 a month. Mr. Johnson pays $800 now. How is that an opportunity for him? The crowd was fully engaged now. Reporters were scribbling furiously. The protesters were nodding. Even some of the city officials looked uncomfortable. Sterling felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, loss of control. Son, he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, the economics of development are complex. You can't expect to understand. I understand that Mrs. Chen works 3 jobs to pay rent on her 2-bedroom apartment where she lives with her 4 kids, Micah interrupted. I understand that your new 1-bedroom apartments start at $2,500 a month. I understand that she makes $1,400 a month total. So where exactly is she supposed to go? The silence was deafening. Sterling stared at this boy who somehow knew details that weren't in any public documents. Who spoke with the precision of a lawyer and the passion of a preacher. Who stood in front of cameras and microphones without fear, speaking truth that cut through political spin like a knife through silk. You talk about building a better city, Micah continued, his young voice carrying across the crowd with devastating clarity. But a city isn't just buildings. It's people. If you take away their homes, their businesses, their community, what are you really building? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sterling opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in 25 years of deal-making, speech-giving, and boardroom domination, Sterling Voss had nothing to say. The boy with nothing had taken away the one thing Sterling thought he'd never lose. His words. The silence stretched like a broken guitar string. Sterling stood at the podium, his mouth slightly open, his political smile finally cracking under the weight of truth. The crowd held its breath. Cameras rolled. Phones recorded. Micah waited, his eyes never leaving Sterling's face. Sterling began, then stopped. He tried again. The project will. But the words died in his throat. Because suddenly, he could see them. Mrs. Alvarez, clutching her photograph, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Mr. Johnson, his shoulders sagged with the weight of 20 years about to be erased. Mrs. Chen, somewhere in the crowd, working 3 jobs to keep her children housed. For 25 years, Sterling had looked at numbers on spreadsheets, not faces in photographs. He'd calculated profit margins, not human costs. He'd measured success in dollars, not dreams destroyed. But Micah's questions had torn away the veil of abstraction. These weren't statistics. They were people. And he was about to erase them. The mayor stepped forward, sensing Sterling's paralysis. "Perhaps we should." "No," Micah said quietly, but his voice carried. "I want to hear his answer. Mr. Voss talks about building a better city. But whose city? Better for who?" Sterling felt sweat gathering under his Italian silk shirt. He was a man who controlled boardrooms, who made governors return his calls, who could move markets with a whisper. But he couldn't find words to answer a 12-year-old boy's question. Because the answer was too ugly to speak. Better for me. For people like me. For people who could afford to matter. "Mr. Voss?" Micah's voice was patient, like a teacher waiting for a struggling student to work through a difficult problem. Sterling looked out at the crowd and saw something he'd never noticed before: hope and fear living in the same faces. These weren't obstacles to his development project. They were families. Communities. Lives. His throat felt dry as desert sand. We want what's best for everyone," he finally managed. Micah nodded slowly. "Then why didn't you ask them what they wanted?" Another question like a blade between ribs. "When you were planning this project," Micah continued, "did you hold community meetings? Did you ask Mrs. Alvarez what she needed? Did you ask Mr. Johnson how he felt about losing his barbershop? Did you ask any of the families what would make their lives better?" Sterling's silence was answer enough. "You spent 2 years planning how to remove them," Micah said, his young voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "But you spent 0 minutes asking how to help them." The crowd was completely still now. Even the protesters had lowered their signs, transfixed by this boy who was dismantling one of the city's most powerful men with nothing but questions. Micah took a step closer to the stage. "My mom used to tell me that real power isn't about what you can take. It's about what you can give. You have more power than anyone in this city. You could help all these people. You could build housing they can afford. You could give Mr. Johnson a space in your new development. You could make Mrs. Alvarez feel safe instead of scared." Sterling felt something crack inside his chest. "But instead," Micah continued, "you're using your power to make yourself richer while making them homeless. And you're calling it progress." The boy paused, letting his words settle like dust after an explosion. "So I'll ask you again, if you take away their homes, their businesses, their community, what are you really building?" This time, Sterling knew the answer. But he couldn't say it out loud. "I'm building a monument to my own greed." The silence stretched until Mayor Richardson finally stepped forward. "I think we should wrap up, thank you," Sterling said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Everyone turned to look at him. "Thank you," he repeated, looking directly at Micah. "For the questions. For making me think." He stepped away from the podium and walked toward his car, leaving behind a crowd of stunned reporters, confused officials, and one boy who had just changed the course of a $200 million project with nothing but truth. As Sterling's Mercedes pulled away, phones were already buzzing. Videos were already uploading. The story was already spreading: homeless boy confronts real estate mogul. Child's question stuns city's most powerful man, who speaks for the forgotten. By evening, the video would have 1 million views. By tomorrow, Sterling Voss would be the most famous man in Chicago. But not for the reasons he'd expected. Has someone ever asked you a question that completely changed how you saw yourself? A moment when someone held up a mirror and you didn't like what you saw? Share your story in the comments, we read every single one. Sterling's penthouse had never felt more like a prison. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city he'd spent decades conquering. 47 floors below, Chicago moved through its evening rhythm, traffic flowing like blood through concrete arteries, lights flickering on in apartments where families were sitting down to dinner, where children were being tucked into bed, where people were living lives he'd never bothered to notice. His phone buzzed constantly on the marble countertop behind him. Reporters. Board members. city officials, lawyers. All of them wanting to know the same thing: what the hell happened today? Sterling had been asking himself the same question for 6 hours. He replayed the moment over and over, like a crime scene investigator studying evidence. The boy's voice. The questions that cut like surgical instruments. The silence that followed, his silence, the kind of powerless quiet he hadn't experienced since childhood. The video was everywhere. His assistant had sent him links: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, local news websites, national news aggregators. The numbers kept climbing. Views, shares, comments. Most of the comments were about Micah: "This kid is brilliant. Someone give him a scholarship." Out of the mouths of babes. But plenty were about Sterling. Finally someone called out this vulture. Hope that kid made him think twice. Rich people like this are what's wrong with America. Sterling had built his reputation on being untouchable. Now he was viral for all the wrong reasons. His phone rang. Richard Blackwell, chairman of his board. Sterling let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Mayor Richardson. Voicemail. Again. Patricia Chen, his head of PR. Sterling finally answered. Patricia. Sterling, thank God. We need to talk. The phones haven't stopped ringing. Channel 7 wants a follow-up interview. The Tribune is running a front-page story tomorrow. The city council is calling for a review of the project approval. Sterling closed his eyes. What's the damage? Honestly? It's not as bad as it could be. Most of the coverage is sympathetic to you, presenting you as someone who got ambushed by a well-coached kid. We can spin this as a learning moment, maybe announce some additional community outreach. What if I don't want to spin it? Silence on the other end. Sterling? What do you mean? He didn't know what he meant. That was the problem. For 25 years, every crisis had been managed the same way. Control the narrative. Minimize damage, maintain power. But something about today felt different. Something about that boy's questions had gotten under his skin like a splinter. Patricia, what do you know about the families being displaced? What do you mean? The actual families. Their names. Their situations. How long they've lived there. Another pause. Sterling, that's not really relevant to Mrs. Alvarez. The woman in the crowd today. What's her story? I don't know. Sterling, where is this coming from? Where was it coming from? From the photograph in her hands, her husband, long dead, standing in front of a building that would soon join him. From the way her shoulders shook when Micah spoke her name. From the realization that he'd never once wondered about the people his projects displaced. Never mind, Sterling said. We'll talk tomorrow. He hung up and poured himself 3 fingers of scotch. Macallan 25, older than the boy who dismantled his reputation in 5 minutes. The scotch tasted like smoke and regret. Sterling carried his drink back to the windows. The city sparkled below him like stars fallen to earth. Somewhere down there, Micah was probably sleeping in whatever shelter he'd found for the night. Mrs. Alvarez was probably lying awake, wondering where she'd live in 30 days. Mr. Johnson was probably calculating how much his life's work was worth in liquidation. And Sterling was standing in a penthouse worth more than all their homes combined, wondering how he'd become the kind of man who could destroy lives without losing sleep. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for listening today. Sterling stared at the message for a long time. The boy with nothing was thanking him for listening. When was the last time anyone had thanked Sterling for something that simple? When was the last time he'd actually listened to anyone whose problems couldn't make him money? He typed back, "Who is this?" The response came quickly, "Someone who thinks you're better than you think you are." Sterling read the message 3 times. Someone who thinks you're better than you think you are. Sterling stared at the message on his phone, and for the first time in decades, he didn't feel untouchable, he felt uncertain. Could a homeless boy really be the mirror he'd been avoiding all his life? When was the last time anyone had seen potential in him rather than just profit? When was the last time someone had looked at Sterling Voss and seen anything other than a weapon wrapped in an expensive suit? He walked to his home office, a shrine to his own success, walls lined with awards and photographs of himself with important people. But tonight, the awards looked like participation trophies, and the photographs looked like evidence of a life lived entirely on the surface. Sterling opened his laptop and did something he'd never done before. He Googled his own name along with displaced families. The search results made his stomach turn. Harper Heights wasn't his first project. Over the past 15 years, Sterling had developed or redeveloped dozens of properties across Chicago. Each project had displaced families. Each had gentrified neighborhoods. Each had prioritized profit over people. The patterns were undeniable. Low-income families displaced. Small businesses shuttered. Communities scattered. Profits soaring. He found articles he'd never bothered to read: The Hidden Cost of Development, Where Do the Displaced Go? Gentrification's Victims, Families Left Behind by Chicago's Boom. The Sterling Effect, How One Developer Changed the Face of the South Side. He found photographs that made his chest tight, families loading their belongings into moving trucks. For rent, signs in windows of businesses that had been someone's American dream. Empty lots where communities used to gather. Sterling had never seen these photos. Had never read these articles. Had never connected his success to other people's displacement. He'd lived in a bubble of abstraction, dealing with numbers and profit margins and market analyses. The human cost had been invisible to him, not because it was hidden, but because he'd never bothered to look. The boy today had forced him to look. And what he saw in the mirror was a stranger. If one boy's voice could shake the city's most powerful man, what happens when that voice refuses to be silenced? Don't miss episode 3, where truth digs even deeper. If this story moved you, like this video, comment "Truth Speaks Louder" to join the conversation, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter.